does, if it spots that there's some word-for-word overlap between what's on in your text and what exists on this absolutely huge database that you've mentioned, and it will actually tell us where those words have come from. So who was the original author of those words? So it's just an opportunity for you to check that you've not fallen foul of making such a referencing error, and also means that we can clarify ourselves which are your words and which might be somebody else's words. So Turnitin's a really useful tool for students and for us to check that you've been approaching your assignments appropriately, and you've been fully acknowledging other people's work if and when you've used that work.
Yeah, and I think sometimes a trap that diligent students can kind of fall into sometimes is over-referencing and, you know, having sort of very long quotes that are sort of 4 or 5 lines long, and then sort of one line of their own text and then have a very, very long quote.
Yeah.
And that's equally bad, and not equally bad, but that's problematic as well.
Yeah, it's understandable, but it's something to be avoided. I think you should only directly quote from somebody else if it's a key author in your area and you actually want to engage with their ideas in an extended manner. So if you're looking at the works of, I don't know, let's say, you know, a real key writer in your area, Anthony Giddens, or, you know, or Karl Marx, you know, if your essay or your research report is about one of those thinkers, then naturally you're going to have a lot of quotes about those thinkers, and what you'll want to do is to not just quote their work and carefully acknowledge and when you do so, but also what you want to do is to provide your own analyses of what they're saying. And I think that will be okay. Where you're writing a research report of the type that I'm suggesting here, then undoubtedly you'll be quoting works from a large number of different authors and researchers, and only use word-for-word quotes if it's really essential to do so. So I would think, really, if you've got more than one direct quote within 2 pages of your own text, that's probably too many direct quotes. So you should not use them liberally, but only when they're absolutely crucial. But as you say, Matt, certainly don't have too many direct quotes, and certainly make sure that you have a lot more of your own text in your research report than you have the directly quoted text of others. The other thing I would say about direct quotes is, if you are going to use them, and that's okay, you must not expect the reader to try and work out themselves why you've got that quote. You would need to say what that quote is actually telling you and why it's important. All right, so you need to justify, if you like, the presence of that particular quote in the research report. So if it's a quote from Giddens or something like that, you'll say what Giddens is saying here in relation to theme A or theme B is this and that and the other. Okay, so the reader can easily see why it is you've included that direct quote.
So we're contextualising it.
It's absolutely critical that you do that, yeah, particularly at postgraduate level. I mean, we do want you to read widely, to consult a large body of relevant literature, but we also want you to critically analyse that literature, not just reproduce it on the page.
Yeah. And I think something that's really important here is the fact that with referencing, sometimes avoiding sort of what sometimes referred to as sort of weasel words of, you know, if you say many people have argued or some authors have argued,
yes,
you need to say who, you know.
You do need, so you need to evidence claims that you make. So exactly, if you say some authors have said this, you need to tell us who those authors are. Equally, if you need to be careful of just saying everybody knows that over the course of the last 3 decades, citizens seem to be withdrawing from formal politics. Leaving a claim like that completely open is not all that helpful. What you need to say is where you have found the data which has led you to make that particular claim.
And then the other risk there is sometimes students making sweeping statements, like it is always the case, or so even when they provide evidence there, nuance is saying, you say moderate your language really in most cases, or so on and so forth.
Yeah. You do need to be nuanced. You need to be subtle in the way in which you express your ideas, because nothing's ever as clear cut as you might say. So it would be wrong to say that we are seeing across Europe a forward march of the far right, and they are having, they are sweeping aside mainstream parties. That's not the case. Different parties will have a different impact in different states, and it's okay to say that we are seeing such a forward march of such trends. We also need to say, this is more obvious in some countries such as France, but it is actually less obvious in the Nordic states. But then again, in Denmark, one of the Nordic states, it is more obvious than in other Nordic states. So it is important to flag up exceptions to a general rule that you might be wanting to explain.
Yeah, no, I mean that's so important. And you're absolutely I think you mentioned this before, but just to clarify, you're absolutely okay with the students using like graphs and tables to communicate a lot of data succinctly.
Yeah. I think that's really important, because if you just report broad trends, then that's not precise enough. At the same time, if you try to be too precise by within your text just reporting lots and lots and lots of numbers, then that can be actually quite hard for people to read and interpret and understand. So visual representation of such hard data, harsh data if you like, that visual representation form of graphs, charts, tables can really help the reader quite quickly see the general points that you're trying to make. So actually, it's not something that I would encourage, or that I would only encourage in your report. It's something that I would insist you must do if you are to maximise the marks and the grades that you get for your assignments. Plenty of tables, plenty of graphs, plenty of charts, and within the module we'll use a computer package called SPSS, the statistical package for the social scientists, which is a computer package that is very, very widely used, not just by social scientists, but particularly by social scientists. And that package will help you to learn how to produce tables and charts and so on. It's pretty straightforward, although it might not appear to be when you first sit in front of the PC.
Yeah, and with regard to the charts, I think it's very important to mention the fact that make sure they're sort of big, clearly set out, referenced in different colours. So you'll agree there's nothing worse than getting a chart where it's like a bar chart and it's done in 5 different shades of grey that are barely perceptibly different.
Yes. So and we'll talk about these issues, about the best way of presenting the data, why shading rather than a colour charts might be effective, particularly if you're going to print out in black and white, because a black and white print will mask the fact that you've got, in reality, some lovely looking yellow bars which you can easily compare with blue bars. So we'll discuss strategies to help you deal with matters such as that when we get together.
And of course you'll be absolutely happy. I mean, obviously we won't read draft essays, but if a student comes in with a graph and says, "Is that clear?" you'd be happy to sort of give a yes or a no. And
Yes. And sometimes that's all it will take. Sometimes they'll say, "Remember what we spoke about in class? Better to do it this way rather than that way." Certainly, there's a temptation when you're new to something like this computer package to try to do absolutely everything and to make your charts look really complex because you think it looks visually appealing. Sometimes when you do that, what that means is it actually reproduces on the page, in a really unsightly manner. So my general rule is nice, big, clear, but simple and straightforward, so it's easy for the reader to understand. So, for instance, I'll just give one example. 3D bar charts are a definite no-no in nearly all cases. Okay, nice, simple, straightforward, 2-dimensional bar charts present your data much more clearly to the reader.
I can't remember who said it.
Keep it simple.
I can't remember who said it, but yeah, someone said about simplicity of design and
Sure,
being clear.
sure.
And then to clarify, you want the charts to be embedded within the report, not in a sort of separate appendix at the end.
Yes. So you'll have, I guess, a paragraph where you, I don't know. Let's say you were looking at the differences in voting behaviour of men and women. Right. So you have a nice simple bar chart of one bar which represents the views of men, and another bar which represents views of women. And you'll have some text saying, in my analyses I found this and I found that. Please see figure 1 below. And therefore the figure should appear immediately below that text, not as a separate appendix or something right at the end of the report. Which means that what you're doing is you're inviting the reader to keep moving away from your page with all your fantastic ideas, keep turning lots and lots of pages until they finally find the table, and you end up kind of looking at that table in a rather decontextualized manner. Much easier for the reader to appreciate the value of the points you're making, where they can see your ideas and immediately glance at the table which would summarize those particular ideas.
Yeah, I think that makes it very clear indeed. Right, so moving on now to submission of the essay. How would you like the students to submit the essay?
Simple and straightforward. We have a now web page where you can find out all sorts of details about the module, and on there's a Dropbox tab, and it's a very straightforward process. We'll talk about using it in class if you've not had a chance to use it in the past. All work submitted using the Dropbox on the module now page, and 2 p.m. on the deadline that you've been given in the module handbook.
And we'd always recommend to students to sort of do it ideally a couple of hours before 2 p.m. because we don't accept technical difficulties as an excuse.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We tend not to get that as an excuse nowadays because we alert students to this particular problem well in advance. But you're absolutely right. We're unfortunately not allowed to accept work that comes in late, where students cite a problem, some kind of technical problem, the computer breaks down, or maybe your web browser starts acting really slowly. So do please plan in advance and don't leave anything till last minute. We can always be quite guilty of that, but it's something to be avoided at all costs. Good timekeeping is really critical. The last thing you want to do is do loads and loads of work, of great work on your module, only to find that it ends up getting submitted late, which will reduce the mark that you can get because of some problem with your computer.
And just something I want to sort of throw in about students should submit it as a Word file, a .docx file, rather than Pages or ODT, because we Turnitin can't always read them and we can't always read them.
Again, keep it simple, keep it straightforward, use the conventional software packages, SPSS to produce the output, but then the output should be copied into a Word document, just as you're saying that.
Yeah, and if you are transferring it from Pages, for instance, to Word, check the formatting, because sometimes that can change as the documents go on. As something we've just had from a recent exam board, if you submit it, definitely check that you have submitted it and the file you've uploaded is the right one, because we've had it before with students who've submitted a file and it's blank or it's an absolute crying shame if that happens. But I guess there shouldn't really be an excuse for it, because you should, of course, carefully check your work before you submit it. Because just as you would proofread your work for silly grammatical or spelling errors and so on, you should actually just also check that the file that you mean to submit is actually the correct file. So always absolutely check everything. Again, it's about good time management. Leave yourself time to do this at the end properly. And the file should always be labelled with the assignment name and the end number, because otherwise we run the risk of having sort of 20-odd files all called report 1 or something.
I mean, what I normally say to my students is put the acronym of the module in. for this, it's CVPP, standing for Citizens, Values and Political Participation. Then put your name, your NTU username,